one two young kids out. They're in their 20s now, but whose mother I helped through her cancer episodes. When they wrote on it, "Is this the John Morrison who may have been a pastor at St. John's, Huntington on Long Island?" And I remember them. This is 20 years ago. So I remember they were tots.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. You never. What are you going to run into? But how much time does it take to go through all these things?
I know, right?
I was flabbergasted. Nothing better to do than to read responses to a picture of a dog and his new basket.
Good luck, my friend.
Somebody said they saved each other.
The Lord be with you.
And
And with
also-
thy spirit.
Thank you for coming out tonight in this nice warm evening. Everybody's got the lilies on except Dave down there.
I got
He's got three
You
lines.
guys got
Three
like
lines
a
of
winter
armor
sock.
underneath.
I got my
I
long
do too.
underwear on forward tonight, right? All right. Well, tonight we're gonna come back into chapter 21 and pick it up at verse 20. And in this section, when Jesus is, is seeking to answer the question, when will this happen? He talked about Jerusalem, the temple will be dismantled, destroyed. And they say, well, what, when? And so he's seeking to answer that question, but there's also a long-term forecast as well behind it. Luke, I think, spends most of his time addressing just what the signs and evidence will be for the destruction of the temple. Matthew picks up and shows more of the ongoing signs and developments throughout the church age. But at any rate, we may not have all the score exactly correct in terms of when and how, but we know that the way ahead is not going to be easy, and that there's the assurance that he's coming back and will put things right. And I love the way he finishes in verse 18 or 19. So stand firm and you will win life. Stand firm and you will win your soul. What does that include, do you think? You will win life.
eternity, everlasting life.
That, and what about between now and
That too.
Okay.
Not necessarily, because they keep on telling us, we're gonna be this pain and suffering before we get there.
But, yeah, life with him starts. Eternal life means the life, the quality, the kind of life you'll experience now, and it gets a whole lot better once we're with the Lord. But it starts now as well. So let's pray and commit the study. Father, we're so aware of how little we know and understand. We come to scripture like this, and so many have studied it and diligently and sought and sorted it all out. But we know enough to know that things won't always be easy for us, and yet we have the assurance of your presence and your promises for not only now but for the future as well. We're in good hands. So thank you, Lord, that we can trust you. So give us insight and understanding as we work through this chapter and beyond. And we pray that it might enlighten us and encourage us and motivate us. We ask for Jesus' sake. Amen.
Hey Dan, before we start, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Where would you rather be here when Jesus comes back, or would you rather be in heaven watching everything unfold?
Part of the returning army. Yeah. Well, I just assumed it was in about 30 seconds.
Okay.
The Lord, yeah. No, Paul said, I'm torn between two, whether to be with the Lord, now, or to stay here for it's more profitable to you. So in the meantime, we all have tasks to do, and we get on with it, and people to love, and people to help and serve, and contribute to the building up of the church. So that's what we need to focus on, and each time we wait, we'll take good rest.
Go ahead, Father John, you can tell him he's not.
Yeah, I was going to say, Yeah, you answered
You
it.
correct me continually on that.
N.T. Wright looks at Paul, the Revelation, and the Gospels, and he's adamant about heaven is not where we go. What is going to happen, we say in the Lord's Prayer every Sunday, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. We go to be with Jesus in paradise, i.e. the thief on the cross. This day you will be with me, not in heaven, because the ultimate thing is Jesus will come again into the new heaven and the new earth. We will not go off in the clouds somewhere. We will be with him. I have no idea geographically where that is. But he said to the thief, this day you will be with me in paradise. But the ultimate joy is the new heaven and the new earth, wherever, as Isaiah said, as Nate pointed out in his sermon, every tear shall be wiped away. There are those of us who will be left behind to engage in that final battle, whatever shape it takes. But we're assured of victory. Just play your part well.
I think that's very helpful. I think the focus in Revelation is on the new earth. In other words, what God started, he will bring back to perfection. We don't know exactly what it will look like when it talks about.
I think that's what you just said is so important. We'll bring it back to perception. Not say, I blew it the first time, let's have another go.
And that's supposed to last for what, a millennium, right? 1,000 years. That's what it says in
And keep
Revelation.
counting beyond that,
Exactly. That's important.
Okay. So Christians have hassled over the timetable of all this and the when and the how. And there's, I started one place when I was in seminary and the years following, and over the last 20 years I've sort of morphed into a different perspective. All I know is that the scriptures only talks about essentially one return of the Lord. And that's what I'm holding. And if I'm wrong and something happens before that, I'm not going to be grouchy and say, well, hallelujah, as long as I'm there, I don't care.
Right. Amen.
Amen. Okay. Let's pick it up and read from verse 20 down through 28. If someone, please. 20 to 28.
Sure, I'll grab it. When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment and fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. They will fall by the sword, and they will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and the stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. Men will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, where the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift your heads, because your redemption is drawing near.
What a picture. Let me ask you this question. In verse 22, it says, for this is the time of punishment and fulfillment of all that has been written. Why was Jerusalem being punished?
But they rejected, for the most part, rejected Jesus. Certainly the leaders did.
Anything else you want to add to that?
I think Larry's right on target, but it's also because they didn't even attend to the prophets before them that gave them the signposts, if you like, to believe. They rejected them.
look back, Jesus has already told his disciples why they will be punished. Look at chapter 19, verses 43 and 44. Chapter 19 of Luke, 43 and 44. Someone read that? Pretty
The
good.
days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you, circle you, hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you.
That's a sober statement, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. And I think of so many people, God in his gracious ways over the years. I've talked to people later in life who finally come to faith, and they look back and they say, wow, I can see now there were different people that God brought into my life in different circumstances. Like, and wake up, look out. This is what you need. And I just blew it off, And then finally, it did come to faith. But
That was Father Nate's message yesterday. Wake up.
wake up.
Powerful.
Good. And so he says it will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the Gentiles are fulfilled. And we mentioned this last week, but what does this mean? The times of the Gentiles will be fulfilled. What is that referring to?
Until they have been adopted by God as his adopted people, as opposed to
Well, that does have Gentiles are included,
Right.
In the church, as we see later on in the book of Acts, it begins to happen. But here he's talking about the nation being under someone else's rule.
Actually, the past 2,000 years, Israel's been
Yeah.
desiccated across the world.
And is Jerusalem today, even part of it, still under Gentile rule? Oh yeah. The mosque, the West Bank and so forth, yeah. So it's not completely free and controlled. And so what he's saying is that Jerusalem's future, Israel's future, will be one of subjugation until the end, when the Lord finally comes and rebuilt the New Jerusalem. We read in Revelation. The New Jerusalem coming down from heaven. So, and then he talks about signs in the sun, moon, and stars. I mean, this is pretty. Talk about Star Wars and fireworks in the sky. What do you think that is pointing to?
Some of the revelation.
that. Is that the future? Because he goes on to say that for his return. Right? Or is it, stand before the Son of Man. So I think it's pointed to the future. I mean, the first one is the destruction of the temple, surrounded by the armies, and then I think the next one is there'll be signs from the sun and moon and stars, and that's more when Jesus returns.
As I mentioned last week, a minority view is that all of this is still focused on the question, when will this happen to the temple? Not a long-term future. But you say, well, look at all this, this talk about signs and sun, moon, and stars, this sort of heavenly chaos and so forth. What does that refer to? But it could be, they argue, metaphoric. In other words, look at chapter 13 of Isaiah. It's describing the destruction of Babylon. Babylon came as God's means of chastisement to Israel for their disobedience. And look at chapter 13, verses 9 to 11 of Isaiah.
My thumb was right there, I don't know why. Okay, 9 for 11. Okay, Isaiah, see the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land desolate and destroy the sinners within it. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. I will punish the world for its evil, the wicked for their sins. I will put an end to the arrogance of the haughty, and I will humble the pride of the ruthless.
But notice in verse 10, the description of the destruction of Babylon. What kind of language does he use? Isaiah there?
And space constellations.
Yeah, the stars of heaven and the constellations will not show their light. It's like turning off the lights of heaven. So did this literally happen? I think so. But it talks about there will be a catastrophic event for Babylon when it falls. And so it tends to sort of say, often in Scripture, in the Old Testament, where it describes the fall of a country or a nation, they will often use this very graphic language to show it's not going to be fun. It's going to be difficult and problematic.
Particularly that when the Romans even destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, they kicked up a lot of dust. They smashed everything to the ground, broke every rock. I mean, that would have been a lot of dust. It would have been hard to see the sky.
Well, that too. But this is when our others, I say, it's looking further down the road. But at any rate, it says people will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world. Have you ever been in a situation or talked to somebody who's been in a difficult set of circumstances, a war zone and so forth? They said it looked like the end of the world. And sometimes when in Ukraine, sometimes when all the rockets are coming in Kyiv or some other part of eastern Ukraine, and some of the people said it's like this rain of fire, and it looks like the end of the world, like this is all. So sometimes we describe something that's localized and say it has cosmic appearance to make the point that it's terrible and destructive.
This is the part where it comes back as a lion. This whole picture of the universe. The universe is crying out for what's about to happen.
That's right. And Paul talks about that in Romans chapter 8. So, and it says at that time they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud. Now, how do you interpret that? Floating on a cloud?
No, it's like talking to a girl in the bush. It's a voice in the cloud.
Yeah, Hebrews number 12 talks about a cloud of witnesses. So often, how literal this is, the point is that he's coming and it will have his view. When he finally does come, everyone will know. It will be universal. So it won't be just one isolated cloud. It will be a global experience. Everybody will know that this is it.
It'll be supernatural. It won't be like Jesus showing up on the middle of Broadway or something like that.
That's an important point, and Dan was alluding to it. The right track, he will not be coming in a cloud, as somebody was saying,
Right.
on a cloud.
It'll be coming like
And this is to attempt to describe something. You look at artists, and they put it in a literal. And this is something what kind?
Yeah, you
does
see
it
Jesus
have
floating
chariot,
there.
little cloud, but if you look at the music that you've heard composed to it at times, that makes it captures the immensity of the moment without trying to turn it into language. Only
That's a good point.
music.
And so obviously Jesus is seeking to prepare his disciples for what's ahead, as well as immediately what's going to happen a few years after he's off the scene, after his crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension to glory. And the church movement will be birthed and start to grow and multiply throughout Judah and Judea and Samaria and then on to the end of the earth. But only 40 years or so hence from this time, and Jerusalem will be destroyed by Cyrus the Great. His subject. You were gonna say
No,
something?
just scratching my ear.
Glad it was your ear.
It says, "But when these things begin to take place, stand up, lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." How do you say that when a landslide's coming your way? How does this help us now? Sitting here.
For me, it gives me peace despite all the craziness that surrounds me and it threatens to carry us in fear.
That's good.
Peace of mind.
So you were talking before, just stepping back for a moment, I went to Acts just to think about Jesus being taken up to heaven. And it said, after he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight, they were looking intently up into the sky as he was going. And suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. Men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking into the sky? The same Jesus who had been taken from you to heaven will come back in the same way that you have seen him go to heaven. So my vision, from pictures,
Yeah.
artwork, is you see Jesus standing on a cloud.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
I know.
it sticks in your head. Really. I mean, you go to many churches, you look in the stained glass windows. There's a picture of Christ, on a cloud. So
When you think of Israel being led through the wilderness, the desert, after the Exodus, and what led them?
the cloud,
The cloud.
Yeah.
Cloud, and at night a pillar of
full
fire.
of fire.
And so there was 24-hour guidance. And I guess part of my encouragement here is that God has a timetable. He has ultimately this universe under his control. And he's allowed forces to work out over the centuries of history, but it's never gone berserk as far as he's concerned. In other words, he's never let go or lost control somehow. He's in charge, and so the control room is not empty. There's someone there, and his name is Jesus. And so,
Dan, do you find that that's one of our problems? At least it is for me. When Tom Wright told me that, John, remember, he has everything under control, that was hard to swallow. I knew it was correct, but it's not under control, not as I would do it, God. If you'd let me have a chance at this.
we often struggle. How do you reconcile these circumstances with the goodness of God?
Right.
And you say it's under his control, but if it was under his control, why did this happen? Why was my granddaughter killed in the schoolroom?
Yeah.
And on it goes. Why did my wife die? Why this and why that?
That's why I
Well,
say,
again, because Jesus did. I mean, he could have, prevented that too, I would imagine, if he wanted to, but that wasn't his plan. So,
Let's skip this one. Let's go to plan.
Plan B.
I would just call in sick and said, sorry, I can't do that.
And we get an answer to that in 1 Corinthians chapter 12.
Mhm.
No, 15, on the resurrection.
Right.
If Jesus didn't rise from the dead,
Yeah.
then we're to be the most pitied of all people because we're trusting in a lie.
Right.
And then he says, but in fact, he rose from the dead. Therefore, it's all, who knows, but it won't even matter.
Yeah.
All the pain suffered
Right.
because they will be
Right.
redeemed and restored.
Right.
What is it? He says that the pains of this present generation are not to be compared with the glory that lies ahead.
Well, there was a line in one of the Harry Potter movies where the Dumbledore said to Harry, because he was complaining or saying something about somebody dying, he goes, don't pity the dying, pity the living, because the dying have found their reward, and the living still are living. Something to that effect.
So he says, don't be caught unawares and don't lose heart. Stay awake, so we can stand and return.
Oh, well, kind of wars, manner of violence.
According to the Geneva, right now I checked it online, according to the Geneva Academy,
Convention. Convention.
not the Geneva Convention, but there's some office there that keeps tabs. And according to their present reckoning, at present, there are 110 ongoing conflict wars in the world at present. 110.
Business as usual.
Business as usual. So, what Jesus forecast is certainly being played out.
The 20th century, wasn't it? The wars they had, mass murders, gulags, death camps, all that stuff.
And it's not improving.
Would you forgive me for 30 seconds?
Sure.
Jim? No?
Yes, sir.
What, did you say something about stained glass windows?
Yes.
And what do they represent to you?
Well, having spent some time in Europe, I enjoyed going to a place that Mrs. Rickard told me about. They built this church starting in 1192, finished it around 1220, and they have what's considered to be the most magnificent stained glass windows in all of Europe.
Is that
And-
shards?
What's that?
Shards?
No, this isn't Paris. It's Sante. Losing my mind here. I think it's Sante Clement. It was the chapel that was exclusively for the kings of France and their close friends. And they have it so that when you go in there, I went in there later in the day. I've been there a couple of times, but I went later in the day when the sun was setting. It's absolutely magnificent. It's magical. And it goes. You follow the windows, and the windows, I don't know how they got these windows in there, huge windows. And it goes from creation to the Adam and Eve all the way through. And so it tells the story that we read. But of course, back then, there were a lot of people who didn't read. So you go to a normal church and you see the stained glass windows and you see that.
The reason I asked you to explain that is how does one respond, or you specifically respond, if you go to a church and there's nothing in the window? There's glass, but there's no
Just
stained
stained
window.
glass windows.
But interestingly enough, the one behind the altar has a circle that was created when it was drawn in the glass was drawn out from where it was. And it makes me think more about what I'm listening to in the service. And all the stained glass windows. Thank you.
Well, I particularly like that stained glass window because it shows our patron saint of our church up there. But if you go to other churches, and I've been to a lot of, it's one of the reasons I don't like modern churches. You're right, they don't tell the stories. They'll
Not a
have,
modern church.
what's that?
Not a modern church.
No, I'm talking about if you go to a church that has been built in the 20th century, let's say, latter part of the 20th century. I've seen these new churches. When the Catholic Church went on a building campaign, they were just throwing in these windows. The church that I was baptized in, that was built on the nickels and dimes of the Irish and the Italians down on West Avenue in Norwalk, you went in there and the whole Bible study was there. Those windows were gorgeous, And if you go to some of the churches even around here, a couple of weeks ago I was at Arlene Coleman's funeral. I love going into St. Thomas Church. There's Tiffany windows there. And they have 3 Tiffany's. I've taken the whole tour, and I give the tour. If you were there, Dan, I should have taken it to look at this window. And some of those windows are just absolutely gorgeous. And they show, we're talking about the ascension of Christ into heaven. That's the thing that sticks in my mind. I'm only human, so I think of Christ rising on the cloud. When I go down to Brooklyn Heights, that section of Brooklyn is known as the city of churches. So I take a walk. Nobody's stopping me. I walk into these churches, and some of the glasswork is just magnificent. I'll tell you, and in my opinion, it's proof. Back me up.
super humble.
No, no. When you see the artwork that's done and the rest of it, I say to myself, this had to be inspired by God. The person that did that, you know, was inspired by scripture and by God, and these things are just magnificent. You know, sad part is the church of Rome.
Jim, I don't disagree with you, but next time you go to London, go to St. Martin's in the Field.
Make sure the orchestra's going there too. And the choir. Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Beautiful.
I think what we're saying is that God, art can also inspire us, motivate us, thrill us even with its beauty and just the skill. And I wished we could see the tent in the wilderness that was made, the colors, the fabric, and God picked a genius to be in charge of the whole design and so forth. And it says he chose a man of skill and ability and inspired him. And I agree. I think there's different ways we can bring glory to God into art. It's one of those designs. And there's different kinds of art today that impress people. Maybe not some of us, but if it works, good. All right, let's go on here. In verse 28, well, let me just say this. I think he's saying all these things up until this point. His main concern is how his followers act from this point on. And he wants them to make the best use of their time, to be aware of the dangers and the pitfalls, but not to be paralyzed with fear when all these things start to go around them and get them. Not to be caught unaware and lose heart, stay alert so they can stand when you find your time. Now, he ends up now, it tells them a parable. Here he comes again after some pretty heavy sermon. It's time for a story, a parable. Jim Miller. Or Nate's time too. And so let's look at that story he gives them in verse 29, somewhere in 30. Someone read that first?
He told them this parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Be careful of your hearts.
Let's stop. What's the point of this parable, story?
Rebirth.
Rebirth?
That's a horrific part. It would be daily.
So what's the challenge? What is he trying to, what's his point in showing this?
Well, he's pointing out that there are signs that we see and we know things are coming near. He mentions the fig trees when they sprout. Summer is coming near. And he says even though they see these things happening, you don't realize that the kingdom of God is near, and that he points out that these things will all happen, but that his words will never pass away. These will all pass away.
So he says in verse 31, even so, when you see these things, all these signs that I've described, these events, catastrophic even, fearful, he says, when these things are happening, guess what? He says, the kingdom of God is near. And then he goes on in verse 32 and makes a statement that scholars have spilled a lot of ink trying to figure out. Can you guess what's the word that they struggle over?
Generation.
Exactly. And there's at least 13 interpretations of this. I think. But what's he saying here? He says, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. And what's the promise in 33? What is he saying here?
Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away.
There's a season and a year's growth, if you will, for everything. And the seasons will come, and eventually the plants die, the animals die, and we forget about it. But in his case, we'll learn to repeat his words. His words will not die away.
So is he saying that there'll be no heaven in the future and no earth in the future?
No.
It's a comparison. He said heaven and earth will pass away, but like might pass away, but they won't. They'll just take a new shape and a new form, a new heavens and a new earth. But he says, my words will never pass away. And here we sit 2,000 years later, and guess what we're reading?
His words.
His words.
And in light of what you said, just let me read this bit from Tom Wright, commenting on this passage, and he begins with exactly what you started to say. Christian readers, puzzling over this passage nearly 2,000 years later, are often at a loss to know what it can say to them. For us, the destruction of Jerusalem, an act of great pagan brutality, is far away in the past. And we know of so many other subsequent crises that the church has faced that we are inclined to think of it as comparatively insignificant. We, however, live and preach the gospel in a world which, as Jerusalem did to Jesus, often refuses the summons to peace. We have at least a duty to warn our contemporaries that to reject God's invitation may well lead to disaster. And in the meantime, we must continue to practice patience. We never know when we shall need it.
This word that I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things happen. The struggle is to know what is that generation referring to?
I mean, race of the ethnicity of Jewish people.
That's one interpretation. Is looking at the Jewish people as a race will not disappear before the Lord's return. That's a real stretch for using generation in that sense.
Could it be the time from when Jesus first came to when he comes back, that generation?
It could be the generation, that's one interpretation, the generation at the time, there will be a generation there at that time. Others say it could refer to the current generation of Israelis who are there, including the disciples. A few of them were still alive when the destruction of the temple came. And some feel that what he's saying is the generation is looking literally, this fulfillment will be with the destruction of Jerusalem as prophesied. And so there will be, whether it's for years, a lot will happen, but there'll be Jewish people there. All we know, and there's other variations in this, I think that we can get hung up on what is this generation really referring to, but as N.T. Wright mentioned, the important thing is that we realize that God has a plan and a purpose, and can bring it to pass, and his words are reliable and trustworthy, and what he says will take place will come to pass. And any other thoughts or comments before we move on? All right, then the exhortations, verse 34 down through 36. Read that first, David.
Sure. Be careful of your hearts will be weighed down with dissipation, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life. And that day will close on you unexpectedly like a trap. For it will come upon all those who live on the face of the whole earth. Be always on the watch, and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen, and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man. Each day Jesus was teaching at the temple, and each evening he went out to spend the night on the hill called the Mount of Olives. And all the people came early in the morning to hear him at the temple.
But here he gives these warnings, be careful, be careful. What makes it difficult for us to be aware of, alert to, think about the Lord's return? What gets in the way for us day to day? When was the last time you thought, oh, the Lord could come again? Maybe it was Sunday when we prayed.
Everybody's life is so busy, you really don't think at all about people in the world, you know. But we know that one day, I just quote to Revelation 21, it talks about, I saw a new heaven and earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no sea. So I saw the whole holy city, Jerusalem, coming down from heaven. I mean, when this new Jerusalem comes, there has to be some tremendous destruction going on, I would think. Destruction. That's going on. So, Vito might have the right idea. Maybe we should, all pray to cut out early to avoid the.
Practice your leaps.
Yeah.
Interesting, 2 Peter 3:10 says, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed."
Got it under 11 steps.
Yeah, and so, does this mean that the world ends with an atomic hydrogen blast? I don't think it's talking about that. And we don't fully understand what it means, but there's going to be something a whole lot better and new that's coming, restored, renewed earth and heaven. And
So again, what's the point? If the people of faith, and this happened today, are we going to be the survivors and be before the sun? Or are we going to be collateral damage? That's the question.
It doesn't matter one way or another.
We're going to be saved, yeah, that's true.
But look at the things that can get in the way from being alert or awake. Distraction. And what are some of the distractions he talks about in this little passage?
Carousing, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life.
Any of these ever been an issue with you that kept your mind away from eternity?
Yeah.
Even the anxieties of life. How can that be a distraction or interfere with our awareness of the Lord's return?
There's an interesting, when do you hear in the contemporary church sermons about judgment? The Episcopal Church's official position is, but we believe in a God of love. And I don't remember whether it was Wright or Tim Keller or one of those fellows who pointed out to me, in your early life, who was the one who loved you the most? And I would have said, without my mother and father. But they still disciplined me. And they loved me enough to discipline me. And I'm sure you're familiar with it. I mentioned it at the Thursday group a couple of times. Niebuhr, back, it's almost 100 years ago, he must have said, a God without wrath has brought men without sin into a church without judgment through a Christ without a cross. And you want to look at condemnation of the contemporary church, because it's all okay. And that's where I think Nate makes this distinction very importantly. God never ceases to love us, but that doesn't free us from being disciplined.
And if you stop and think about it, if God doesn't, if he doesn't have concern for evil and for anger, destruction, and immorality, then what kind of a God is he? Indifferent. A holy God has to deal with the bad stuff because of who he is. And a God of love he's a loving God, but a holy God. And there will come a time when he'll deal with all and put everything to right. And so when we whitewash the wrath of God is not a fit of anger. It's a settled, as John Stott put it, it's God's settled disposition towards evil.
Yes.
He looks at it in perfect awareness and with correctness of thought and sees it for what it is and will judge it for what it is. So this, language here is pretty graphic, isn't it? And that day will come close on you suddenly like a trap. Bang! Like that. My little party. In the next zip code by now. So he says, so how do we avoid going to sleep? How do we stay awake? In verse 36, how do we translate that into something that will help you in the coming days and weeks?
You know, watch and pray. Just pray for it. Talk to God. And you'll be able to escape all that is about to happen.
I think so. In a busy life, no one can concentrate on it all the time. But if you pray daily or frequently within a day, pulls us back and puts things in proper perspective.
It's good, Pete. Yeah.
There was a movie, probably all of us are old enough to have seen it when it came out, back in the 50s with Kevin McCarthy, called The Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Oh, yeah.
The original. Remember, what must you not do?
Fall asleep.
Is go to sleep. And it was a metaphor for judgment if you went to sleep and were not prepared, as your souls were snatched like casually going along, nothing's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, our minds can only occupy one thing at a time. And we've got work to do and lives, and God doesn't want us to sit around becoming robotical. But I think it's a general attitude of awareness that our time is limited, that there's going to be a change coming. There's a sense in which we need to be in our prayers for our family or those around us. There's a sense that we don't have all the time in the world, that people are on paths that will lead to eternity with Him or the bad place. And so it's important that we be aware of the times and pay attention.
Interesting, Dan, that when you read Acts, that the early Christians felt that time was coming right around the corner. And here we are 2,000 years later, and you wonder when.
Okay, so in closing this segment, it says each day Jesus was teaching at the temple. It's hard to say how many actually heard his voice. You know, there were a lot of noise in that temple. It covered a large area. We know 40 acres. Was it 40 acres? Maybe it was big. No, 17. How many acres is there, David? You know?
It's like 40 acres.
What?
40.
That's what I thought. Thank you. So in the temple is only part of that, and so that you have the area around it, according to the Gentiles and women and so forth, where most of the people gathered, and that's where the sacrifices were prepared. And of course, as we come up to Passover, you can imagine the multitudes that were there from all over the Jewish world. So, at night he goes out up and there were a lot of people. Mount of Olives was considered during Passover as part of the city limits. And so not only Jesus and the disciples, but there were a lot of other people that camped out because there just wasn't room in the city at that point. We think it's squeezed now, you know. Lived in the city, inside the city for about 3 weeks when I was doing, my wife and I were doing a study program. And really, you can walk from end to end in an hour, you know. And so they were squeezed. But it says all the people came early in the morning to hear the attraction that he held. Okay, any other questions about this passage that we just finished? Now we go on into Holy Week and the beginning of it leading up to the crucifixion. But let's read the first segment, at least of chapter 22, 1 through 6.
Got it. Now the feast of unleavened bread, called the Passover, was approaching, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some way to get rid of Jesus, for they were afraid of the people. When Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12, and Judas went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus. They were delighted and agreed to give him money. He consented and watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them when no crowd was present.
There's a lot in this paragraph. So let's pick out one thing at a time. It says the festival of unleavened bread, called the Passover. How long? What is this festival?
This is a festival of the Jewish people that represents independence and freedom. They got their freedom from the Israelites. So
Egypt.
Egypt, excuse me, Egypt. And so it's a very meaningful.
So the Passover itself was a one-day event, and they added on a week, and that's why it's called the festival of unleavened bread. Why was it called unleavened bread? What's with the unleavened bread?
Well, they,
Bill can tell us all about this.
They didn't have to bake the bread. They didn't have
But-
time to do it, so they made unleavened bread.
time to let it
No
rise.
yeast,
No yeast. You got
No.
matzah.
Matzah, with a lot of butter.
No butter. No butter. Let's
Oh,
not
that's
go-
right.
Please.
Butter. I'm a Gentile.
Yeah, I know. Butter Gentile. Come on.
What about margarine? There's no butter in margarine, right?
Oh my God.
No, no, the carne. Anyway, and so it's a 1 week, an 8-day event. 8 days. So he was in the, we don't know exactly what he was doing day by day, other than he was teaching and encountering and so forth. And then it says, as Passover day, when did Passover actually happen? The Passover feast. Yeah.
March or
sometime
April.
between April and May.
It was it's the in the spring. It's all regulated by the moon phases. So I think it was
Nisan 14.
it was like so many days after the first after the vernal equinox, the first full moon, determined when the Passover took place. So it took place at different days.
No, okay. And so it was approaching, and notice, we just read, and all the people came early in the morning to hear him. But what about the leadership in town? How did they feel about it?
They were afraid.
They were looking for some way to get rid of this guy.
They were
What
afraid.
a contrast, what a startling contrast. The majority of people, I mean, I'm not saying they had everybody right, they had mixed motives, some of them didn't understand it. They were drawn to this person. Many thought he was going to bring in, the kingdom and restore Israel. And even his disciples were still in that line.
And he came to answer, they sought how they might kill him. And it wasn't just get rid of him, they wanted to kill him.
Yeah, and so they, and it says they were afraid of the people, so they were trying to figure out how in the world we're going to pull this off, so that it's not a big public event, and then we get the wrath of the people on us. And what does that say about the leaders?
They were mean, vicious, cruel guys. No wonder Jesus was exasperated with them.
And what was their problem? Why did they want so desperately to get rid of Jesus?
All comes down to power.
Well, he showed them how bad they were because of the way they acted, behaved, and thought they were doing the right thing. But Jesus exposed them for what they really were.
sign was a real threat, right? They saw him as potentially stirring up the situation and getting the Roman army on their, on their case and losing even what control they had at this point. And so I'm also as a false prophet. But basically, like you said, it was a power struggle. They were number one, they were on top of the hill, and they didn't want anyone changing that. And so it says in verse 3, something enigmatic. When Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. What does that say? What's going on there?
What was your question again?
When you say Satan entered Judas,
Yeah.
what do you think is going on there?
This is his moment.
Well, out of all the apostles, too, Judas was the one that was very vulnerable. He was the one that held the purse. And they said that he was skimming off the top. So there were issues with Judas from day one.
If you look over at John 13, verse 27, John 13, verse 27, you get a similar description. Can you read that, John 13, 27?
As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him.
As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. This is where the Last Supper. And so some have said, well, how can you blame Jesus if it was Satan that made him do it?
I can't blame Judas.
How can you blame Judas if the devil made him do it? You ever use that expression?
Yeah.
I mean, the devil made you do it.
But Wilson,
He was the weakest link out of the 12, and he was the most corruptible out of it because of his, he was basically a money change. He dealt with wealth, one of his weaknesses.
I mean, we don't know for sure. I mean, his name is Judas Iscariot, and some, there's a couple of possibilities. One is that he was from a town in southern Judea, that was similar to this name, or that he was part of the Iscariot, the Brotherhood of the Knives. In other words, he was part of the assassins or the zealots who were seeking to throw off Roman power.
He was like a ninja. Ninja warrior.
But that wasn't that. What was that in the Chosen? It wasn't him. It was.
Yeah, they had him with the knives and so forth.
No, I'm thinking of somebody else.
And we don't want to speculate. The point is that, sure, some have argued that he was disillusioned, that he expected Jesus to be the hero, ride through a shining horse and change the world. And that wasn't going to happen now. And now he thought, well, maybe I can help him, motivate him to do so. So I arranged this deal. But that just didn't wash with me. Because it says he was morally corrupt as well as theologically bent. And there was the persuader, the liar, that was whispering into his ear. And it's interesting, it says, and Judas went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard. At what point did he do this? It doesn't tell us in this account. Well, that's something.
Christians did it before they had the Last Supper. He made arrangements for it, obviously.
Yeah, because Jesus said to him at the Last Supper, "Do what you came to do."
Yeah. So Jesus did Jesus make a mistake and appointed this guy to be one that probably prayed all night long and said, and then he said,
No.
you, including Judas.
He knew this was going to happen. The scriptures had to be fulfilled. And this was the mechanism.
Betrayed. He said he was going to be betrayed.
That really hurts. Have you ever been betrayed?
Yes.
It's,
And it says, and he came, and you know, it was 30 pieces of silver, and what does that translate into roughly in today's currency?
Well, silver went over 58 bucks. It's up $1.60 and $2 at one point, so it's a lot of money probably, I don't know.
But in those days, really, it amounted to maybe 3 to 4 at the most, 3 to 4 months of work for a daily worker. Is that worth, you know, selling a guy?
But they want to steal with it.
Yeah.
And they want some real estate. It's ironic because Judas was a real estate salesman. So they would have used the money to buy some real estate. Then he'd hang himself and die.
Yeah. But the point is that it says here, it says, they discussed with him how he might betray Jesus, and they were delighted and agreed to give him money. And it says he consented. And literally it means it was discussed, and perhaps he haggled over the price, but he went very low for what he would be asked to give. But it just shows something about his character and how bent his idea was.
What you're trying to say in shorthand, he wasn't a good businessman, he could have gotten a better deal.
Do you think that he actually knew that that Jesus was gonna be killed? Or did he think possibly they just wanted to take position and do something? I mean, to take it to the extent that it ended up.
I mean, later he regretted, he realized he made a terrible mistake. Unfortunately, he didn't go back and ask forgiveness. He just went out and hung himself. But, yeah, it's hard to say. He was a conflicted person. Yeah. And it said that he was better born, not to have been born, Jesus said. All right, well, our time is done. We can leave it at that note, but, anything that you want to share?